Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
In a moment, we are going to interview Jordan, who identifies as an ISFJ personality type. A few things I want you to keep in mind before we get started. First, we may use some shorthand and technical language in this interview. So if you want a visual download, a handy guide that can help you follow along, visit personalityhacker.com and find that PDF directly below this episode. Second, Jordan has been through our profiler training program. She knows herself and type very well. So with this in mind, we want to encourage you to look past stereotypes you may have for the ISFJ personality. If you're brand new to type, just a reminder, I stands for introvert, S stands for sensor, F stands for feeler, J stands for judger. These four letters are called dichotomies, and they are what most people know about personality type. But the true power of the system comes from understanding personality on a much deeper level. These are called cognitive functions. And in this interview, we're going to go ahead and dive into those deeper waters. To get an overview of the ISFJ cognitive functions, the best place to start is to search for a podcast we've already recorded. It's called ISFJ Personality Type Advice. The cognitive functions can be a bit technical at times. Again, I recommend downloading our handy ISFJ guide directly below this episode. Just head over to personalityhacker.com and you can find the PDF right there. This week, we have a special guest, Jordan Wiles, joining us at Personality Hacker. Jordan, welcome to the show this week.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Jordan, you are a profiler training student here at Personality Hacker, but you're also an ISFJ in the Myers-Briggs system. And so we wanted to invite you to come on to the program today because as an ISFJ, having gone through profiler training, you understand type and cognitive functions at a deep level. And my guess is that you have some things you could share with us about what it's like to really be an ISFJ, maybe an ISFJ on your growth path, an ISFJ relating to other people, and what you've found, about yourself, what you've discovered about yourself and other people and relating to them based on your cognition. But before we start talking about all the specifics of your personality type and your life, Jordan, orientate us. What do we need to know about Jordan before we get started?
Well, I am 32 and I am a stay-at-home homeschool mom of 5 kids. I've been married for almost 13 years to my high school sweetheart, who is an ISFP, and we love life. I would consider myself, I don't like labels, so I don't ascribe to any particular denomination, but I would associate myself with Christianity, or as I like to call it, a believer. I have a small practice where people just kind of trickle in when they want to know about type and relationships, how to communicate better with their loved ones, how to understand their loved ones better, and kind of overcome some of the relationship traumas from the past in their communication breakdowns.
Fantastic. So how did you discover type? How did you discover that you were an ISFJ? What was that like for you?
Well, I would say it was about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. My time is a little askew with that because I've dove right in and haven't come up for air since. But I would say it was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was having some trouble with some different family members that there was just poor communication. We were crossing wires, not understanding things, enduring a lot of conflict. My journey started trying to understand them better. And in the process, I learned more about myself. So it was a win-win for sure. I found Personality Hacker very shortly after. Shortly after that, got into astrology and different other typology methods and models. I'm a huge Beeps fan, so lots of stuff like that.
So you actually started out in personality types to deal with, it sounds like, some conflict or like relationship management. But then did it end up becoming something that you started applying for yourself in personal growth or development, or do you still primarily use it for relationships?
Mostly always. I think that that's really the niche that I found is the most beneficial in my personal life. And in my interpersonal relationship with other people, it's what I find they're looking for. A lot of it is self-growth as well, but most of it is for the ability to understand and relate and connect on a deeper level with the people in their lives.
Well, that would make sense, right? Since using extroverted feeling or harmony, that's always a really important aspect of that function. Yeah. So, so this is actually this is a world that's filled with a lot of people who are more, geared toward using their intuitive function or process. So, as you've navigated through all of that, what's been your experience as an ISFJ diving into content that's almost always presented by people with very different cognition and wiring?
Yeah, it's been very interesting, and I've loved the community that I've become involved in through profiler training, and then other little groups here and there that I just find myself. I like to call myself a social butterfly, literally, because I'm as quiet as you could imagine, flitting from one group to the next. So you wouldn't even know I was there unless I decide to comment on something or throw a thought out there. But the intuitives in this community are amazing, and they are so helpful. And I will say it was a learning curve at first. Well, maybe not necessarily a learning curve, but you definitely felt a little bit like I am not adequate. I am not here to stand on par with these people. It just isn't going to happen. And they're way above where I'm at. But they are, surprisingly, I found so many that are down to earth and really interested to hear a sensor's perspective, which was very exciting. I don't know, it felt, even at profiler training, I think I was the only ISFJ there in my class. And I think Antonia even made a note that, like, you're going to be treated like royalty. And immediately I was like, where are the rest of the wallflowers and where can I blend in? Because that's not where I want to be.
Oh, no, I called you out.
But I've learned so much. Yeah. But I love the community. I love intuitives. Most of the people I surround myself actually with are intuitives. So it's great.
So then, as you've really dove into all of this, what have been some of your major ahas around how the system can be useful for people in relationships? Since you're primarily using it as obviously, when you're getting better at relationships, that always helps us, I guess, sharpen the saw of who we are. But as you're using this specific tool to navigate through relationships and help that component, what are some of the major ahas that have presented themselves to you?
I know it's not a big thing to talk about behaviors within type, because especially with Myers-Briggs, it's more about your cognitive wiring. But I think that understanding the connection between cognitive wiring and behaviors has been so integral to my learning. I deal with a lot of people who are very open with their past traumas and trauma bonding and attachments and things like that. And it's very interesting how those things play into how cognitive functions play into those things. So learning deeper about the wiring of individuals and layering all of these different models on top of one another. Like, for instance, if you have two ISFJs, but they're on opposite ends of the Enneagram scale, and then you couple that with astrology and their zodiacs and different things like that, I just find it so fascinating, the complexities of how you could have two of the same Myers-Briggs type in a room, and they can present so very opposite and maybe even not get along very well because of those complexities. But learning like the commonalities and where they sync up based on the Myers-Briggs is a lot of fun to try to figure that out.
So Jordan, I want to bring us down from the theory level now to ask you maybe a direct question about how, if I'm guessing you have, how have you changed the way you approach conflict in your own personal life now that you understand type as an ISFJ? Your co-pilot auxiliary cognitive function is extroverted feeling. We nicknamed it harmony. Focused on getting needs met, creating a harmonious experience. And I'm guessing that you've had to exercise this and grow this. And this is a tool you probably use in conflict resolution in your own personal life. Has that evolved for you? Have you changed the way you approach people and the world based on what you know about yourself now?
I think a really prominent podcast of you guys that I've listened to that really helped to illuminate some things in my own personal life was one about the FETI polarity, and how if you do not integrate the TI, the logic-based systems, what happens is FE just gets overrun with emotional data without the boundaries. And so you're creating a synthetic harmony without understanding where you fit into it, where the individual, you and your thoughts and your opinions and data, if you will,
Yeah.
comes into play, and you end up getting run over in the process. So I found myself a lot being the compliant one in conflicts, in order to keep what I thought was harmony was actually just compliance, and trying to keep the peace in I like to say, a synthetic way, because it wasn't genuine. It was fear based and from a lot of trauma. So understanding that and how important it is for logic to play into my conflict resolve, and not even just for me, but for other people involved in the conflict, hearing everybody out and hearing everybody's truth laid on the table, almost like a puzzle. Like you're examining each person's individual piece of the puzzle before you can put them together. So the TI is the individual puzzle pieces, and the FE is bringing them together for real, genuine harmony.
Gotcha. So what I'm kind of hearing through what you said is that in the past, there was probably this moment where you saw conflict arising between you and other people, or, other people amongst themselves. And I'm gonna go ahead and infer this, that you basically would run and just try to smooth things over quickly in the past. But you realize that wasn't true harmony. That was just covering over the issues. People are quote unquote getting along, I guess, but they're not actually resolving anything. And when you started to weave the truth of your introverted thinking or accuracy process, which is your 10-year-old or tertiary process, that starts to now arrive at getting the conflict actually handled. It probably takes longer. It's probably more involved. But at the end of the day, people feel more resolution.
Yes, for sure.
What did that look like then for you? Like developing that part of you that, the introverted thinking or accuracy 10-year-old tertiary, and making that a part of your overall relationship skills. What did that look like for you? And did it cost you anything?
Well, I learned very early on that being a quizzical person was often looked at as argumentative. So I shut that part of me down very quickly, both in my home and then also in our religion. It was not looked upon in a good light for a woman or a child to question anything. And so I naturally like to question things, and not because I'm trying to figure it out necessarily. It's because I just want to understand, and I want to know what makes people say the things they say, do the things they do. And so my FE almost kind of overrode that system of asking the questions, verifying questions. And it was almost, more action oriented, where I was creating an actionable goal before I was even asking the right questions. Obviously, having children throws a wrench in every system you thought you understood. So the more children we had, and just trying to understand how we are to equip them to be emotionally intelligent and verbally intelligent, being able to ask questions and without fear of repercussions, that asking questions is never a bad thing. And understanding, oh my gosh, I still do this. Like, I'm teaching my kids to do something that I haven't overcome yet. So I kind of had to backtrack a little bit there, because I knew exactly what I wanted them to know based on my experience. But I was still kind of living in that trauma space of not being able to ask my questions and hear my voice and state my opinions and thoughts and ideas. And just going through that whole process definitely helped me understand the value of TI and the value of asking questions and being detail oriented, and that's my way of connection.
Yeah, actually, something you just said struck me, which is that you're making a plan before you have all the information. And I've noticed, what's interesting is that you and I share all the same cognitive functions, but just in reverse order. And so I also have had a lifetime or a lifelong pursuit of balancing those same two functions, but just in the other direction, right? I can't go too far into my extroverted feeling. But what I've noticed is that as I've attempted to develop that part of who I am and done more around what does it actually mean to get somebody's need met? What does that really look like? And how do I go about that? I've noticed the first thing I do is I try to get as much information as possible, because how do I know what your need is, right? And so this idea of asking questions and getting really solid, good information, I think, that whole, the polarity, as you mentioned, extroverted feeling, harmony, introverted thinking, accuracy, it's almost like it creates its own function itself, right? It's like they're not separate from each other. They feed each other. And
Right.
being unable or teaching yourself not to ask questions and not to gather the right information, it really does. It makes that extroverted feeling or harmony part, it makes it sort of flaccid, you know?
Exactly. And I find that in most relationships where there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of trauma bonding from childhood wounding or relationship wounds from the past that are almost projected on the current relationship or the current conflict situation. So you almost bypass all the questions in general, assuming this situation is exactly like the previous one. So I find that it's a problem in general for people to not ask questions.
Oh man, that is such a brilliant insight, particularly from somebody leading with introverted sensing, or what we nickname memory, that this idea of if you think you've seen this before, your mind is just going to go, oh, I've seen this before, and make a bunch of assumptions. But if you ask the right questions, now you might get information that tells you, no, this isn't what you've seen before. And I hearing you say that?
Yes, absolutely.
So then let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about your adeptness with that concept, right? Your introverted sensing or memory function. This is your driver or dominant as an ISFJ. And this idea of how we are influenced by the past, how we are sort of the sum total of the experiences that we have and assumptions we make about life based on those experiences. It sounds like you have a lot of wisdom in that perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I love my driver almost a little too much. I can definitely get stuck in the past as far as, well, both positive and negative, I would say. I hold on to things a little bit too long. I definitely have been known to make a long list of wrongs of other people, and then also really love reliving beautiful memories. And I can recall them like crystal clear, which is always fun to kind of just sit back and reminisce in that way. It's almost like watching your favorite movie whenever you want to. I've definitely been known to be a creature of habit, again, both in good and bad ways. I'm very ritualistic. I love routine. Routine to me is so comforting, and it's almost like it's not necessarily knowing what's fixing to happen, but it's knowing that whatever is expected of me is going to happen. And whether it's my expectations of myself or the people that I'm responsible for, what they expect of me. So keeping it in checks and balances with my NE. My NE is very playful. I love to explore with it and create. I love making things that will impact people, whether it's art or food or content. Every now and then I'll pop on Instagram and create something that I feel like is going to matter to somebody. So I see SI and NE working together a lot there, but I also have to keep it in check because sometimes I will become too rigid, and I really have to tap into that NE to be able to expand and kind of get out of my head for a little while, not too long, but just long enough that it gives me room to breathe, I guess. One day the schedule might go out the window. If it's nice outside, we'll just scrap school for the day and we'll go hang out with some friends at the park or something. That's not normal, but it's so refreshing when it happens.
We were actually just talking with somebody else, an ENFP, about how difficult it is, for all three of us ENPs, we were talking about how difficult it is to create a ritual and get in a routine. And if one little thing bumps it out, now it's like it's another 4 to 6 months of trying to get back into your routine.
Yeah, as Jordan was talking, I was thinking, Jordan, you're like, yeah, normally I'm on a routine. And then one day, every 6 months, I might be like, oh, it's a nice day. Let's go to the park. We'll just flip that. Normally I'm not on a routine, and then one day every 6 months I'm like, oh, look, I had a great day where I did everything I was supposed to on the schedule I was supposed to do it. That's how it shows up for me.
Yes, for sure.
Which is funny on the other side of that. Okay, so I want to go back to this idea of introverted sensing, knowing what's coming, this memory process of yours, knowing what's coming. You made this comment, I kind of have a question around it, maybe an aha that I'm getting at or something I'm driving toward. Is it because you want to know that when you get to that moment, you're going to be competent to deliver in that moment? Is that what's driving you to want to know what's coming next? You've got what it takes to live well there? Or is there something else that knowing what's coming down the road helps you deal with?
Oh, absolutely, Joel. I mean, like I said, layering these different models. So I'm an Enneagram 1. And so responsibility, integrity, like all these things are so important to me. So knowing that I'm competent to meet those expectations, especially of my family, but it extends beyond that, clients or friends or, whatever. Knowing that I have the time I need to prepare, especially if this is somewhere I've been before, if this is something that I've done before, the adeptness is more on point. So there's a little bit less timidity there. But for sure, knowing what is expected of me gives me the ability to kind of brace myself for impact, if you will, and work up to it, knowing that I've crossed all my T's and I've dotted all my I's, and whatever I'm about to present to them is going to be on point. So there's a little bit of that Enneagram 1 perfectionism kind of lighting the fire underneath that too.
So what's interesting is that a lot of times when I talk to people who, maybe have extroverted intuition or even extroverted sensing, there's great pleasure in subverting expectations, like finding out what people's expectations are so you can do the opposite and, disrupt their expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And what I hear from you, or at least the subtext, is expectations are really important to you. And so there's a desire to do that almost as a service for other people as well.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, for sure.
So when you have your expectations subverted, you mentioned, you'll go off routine, and it's refreshing when you do that. But life, of course, does not always give us exactly what we expect. So as you're going through, when life throws you a curveball, how do you find yourself responding?
A lot of deep breaths, because even as you said that, like my heart dropped a little bit. So even having to imagine this scenario, even though I've had it happen a billion times, it's definitely never in my favor. I feel like I'm always trying to keep my head above water in those situations. I grew up with a lot of intuitive family members, and I feel like sometimes, on one hand, it's what I really love about intuitives is this broad, open framework, and everything that they do is so expansive. And I feel so small compared to that. So trying to keep up with them a lot of times was very difficult. So even now as an adult, trying to, like, say we have a family event coming up. I hosted Thanksgiving this year, and trying to accommodate everybody's varying needs. And then, oh, well, we're going to be an hour late, or we forgot to bring a side dish, or, trying to adapt to these normal everyday life situations can sometimes be hard enough. So the bigger ones are definitely a lot more challenging, but I just brace myself and I revel in the fact that I am an ever evolving dynamic human being, and I was built to adapt. I was built to serve. I was built to love. I was built to embrace all of these aspects of me. So this shouldn't be daunting. It shouldn't be something that I feel like is going to cripple me.
That's so interesting that you talk about intuitives being broad and expansive, and it makes you feel small. And yet in a moment in which you're orchestrating something that's actually quite complex, like a Thanksgiving dinner that takes a lot of different people into consideration, has a lot of moving parts. And as you're trying to organize and orchestrate all of this, surrounded by people that you would define as broad and expansive, but they're like late and forgetting things and maybe forgetting crucial dishes. And you're just, having to be responsive and figure it all out. In those moments, I would say that, like, you are the person who's broad and expansive in those moments.
Yeah, probably. It keeps me on my toes, and I stress about it later.
Like, you don't let yourself stress about it in the moment. It's only in retrospect, right, after you, when you're reviewing the experience, that's when you let yourself feel stress.
Yes, I call it post-processing disorder. I don't know if that's an actual term or if it's just one that I made up for myself, but it's this idea of experiencing trauma after something has happened that wasn't traumatic at all.
That is a fascinating idea. And I bet that happens to you quite a bit since you're so tapped into your introverted sensing, that memory function.
Yes, absolutely.
So can you walk us through the process of how you navigate through that space?
On one hand, it's SI's, I wouldn't say inability, but definitely a handicap of being able to adapt. Like you guys say, it adapts over time. It's that, but it's also this I kind of have to zone into that space of reality, like what actually happened, and walk myself through the events as they occurred, because my NE will just definitely try to get away with me and create all of these storylines that weren't real, that will cause a lot of unnecessary trauma, to the point of my body is responding in a traumatic way to an imaginary scenario. So walking myself back through the events as they happened, I could give you an example. Say we're at the park, and I have two SE boys. So they are so incredibly active and very dangerous, very risky kids. Nothing happened. Everything was totally fine. But, there's a lot of movement. And I also have sensory processing disorder too. So the more things that are going on around me, the harder it is to kind of keep tabs on everything. And again, I have 5 kids. So we'll leave the park or that event that we were at, and absolutely nothing happened. But the whole drive home, I'm having to control my heart rate, control my breathing, and tap into that SI space of, this is how this event actually happened. Nothing harmful, nothing dangerous. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got kidnapped, and having to just kind of really rest in that space.
That is fascinating. So what I'm hearing from what you're saying is the intuitive part of you, the extroverted intuition, also in a way is post-processing an event that happened. In other words, you're thinking about all the possible contingencies, the what-if possibilities after the event.
Yes.
That is so fascinating. Is that every event, or is that just high stakes events where you're watching 5 kids at the park or Thanksgiving, or is that every moment of your life you're reviewing this intuition's doing this to you?
No, like I said, I think it's my sensory processing and my auditory processing. I think because SI is so, it's a very quiet function. It's a very retrospective, reflective function. And so when there's a lot going on in the moment, very real time, it's so much to process, and it has to be processed afterwards. So trying to process it all in the moment, sometimes I can almost zone out. And then when I'm by myself and I'm quiet, it all hits me at once, like a flood. So it's not always that it's definitely not an everyday thing, for sure. I would probably be in an institution if it were.
Yeah, it doesn't sound terribly pleasant, thinking about all the possible things that could have gone wrong, even though you were able to experience the entire thing and it was fine. Does your extroverted intuition, or that exploration 3-year-old or inferior that we're talking about, does that part of you also give you gifts of insight?
Oh, absolutely. Things that maybe I didn't notice. And I think it helps too. I love the saying in our community of, those who fire together, wire together. And my husband with NI, even though it's his 10-year-old process, it's still so incredibly sharp that we kind of, I don't know, we'll feed off of each other after a scenario, because we both like to post-process to a degree. So we will talk about an event that we were at, and he'll be like, hey, did you notice such and such, or so-and-so, or this thing or that thing? And I'll be like, oh yeah, I did. Or, I'll go back through a memory and I'll pinpoint things that I didn't notice before, and maybe try to expound on them and what they meant to me, and, maybe something that they relate to presently, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. When you do a post-processing of a situation, do you catch details in post that you didn't catch in the moment?
Yes, sometimes if it is causing me some distress, I will catch something post-processing, and then I'll just be grateful for it. I'll take a moment and just, I pray and I thank God that, either that thing didn't happen, or, this thing that I'm remembering later, if it was something my kid did that was great, that diverted a bad situation, I would just thank them. So having these little opportunities of gratitude, I feel like NE definitely gives me that, because NE is a very optimistic function.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
I suspect, you're using the word gratitude. I suspect gratitude is a leverage point for somebody who's leading with introverted sensing or memory as a dominant or driver function, because you're going to be doing so much review, finding all the things to feel grateful about. I suspect that that's important, as opposed to looking for like things to only feel maybe cynical about or to have sour grapes around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been a big list keeper and journaler and all that kind of stuff. And so I'll have seasons of my life where I'll just go and I'll journal in a day. I'll just pick a topic, like, I don't know, 5 things that were great about today, or five things my kids said that were great or funny or whatever. And I'll just write down those things. And so I think NE definitely helps to expound on those things.
It also sounds like you're attuning your memory process repetitively by doing that journaling on what you're grateful for. The gratitude you're doing makes it so the next day you're probably going to be grateful again. Like you're priming the pump. You're setting yourself in the framework of this to look for it. So now as you're post-processing these things, gratitude is the framework you're entering life with in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I read a book in my early 20s about gratitude not being synonymous with happiness. And that was, I know that's kind of an elementary thing, but to me at the time, it was so profound, and learning to be grateful for things. And one reason for journaling and recording these things is to be grateful for experiences and the impact they leave on you. And then passing them on later to my kids. I have like a whole downstairs basement room full of journals that I've kept since I was like 10. That I hope to pass down to my kids one day. And they're just full of lists and events that happened and what I took away from them. So, yeah.
What a legacy. What an incredible gift to give your children. Your thoughts, your dreams, your hopes, your gratitudes build up over a lifetime. Like that's a treasure. That's a priceless treasure you're going to gift to them. Thank you for doing that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I know you're a modest person, so this might throw you off a little bit, but as I'm listening to you, I'm getting an idea of what your superpowers are, Jordan. But I would love to hear from.
Okay.
Well, I was actually going to ask you directly. What do you believe your superpowers are?
Communication and connection, for sure. I love to teach, and I love to mediate other people's connections. I love to stand as a partisan, if you will, of watching other people reunite and these, redeeming things that were lost. So my practice is called Restored and Rewired, and it hinges on redeeming lost communication. So I really love teaching people and helping people in regaining communication.
And how do you do that? What's your methodology or process for that?
I really encourage other people to listen, like I said, asking verifying questions and kind of working through some trauma so that they're no longer projecting that onto their partner or their children. Definitely observing, which I know is a huge SI trait, is just sit back, observation, record, that kind of thing. So I really encourage parents and spouses and partners to observe and take note, not necessarily literal notes, but take note of the things that are happening in real time, both when they're in conflict and out of conflict, and patterns and behaviors of themselves and their spouses or their partner, whoever they're in conflict with. Mm-hmm. I obviously encourage people to learn more about type because the more we know, the more power we have, the more ability we have to understand.
What I heard you saying is that, when you walk people through really listening, asking the right questions, and then not projecting their traumas onto their partners or their kids, this is really, I think, about owning your own experience. Like if you've had traumas from the past, you have to sort of bring those in-house and understand them on your own, not blame the people in your life that are moment to moment maybe triggering them. That sounds like a really beautiful tapping into an understanding of introverted sensing or memory. Basically, how our pasts still impact us and affect us. But I think sometimes we just forget to go travel back and go look at those timelines and look at them directly.
Yes. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. They think, well, I've forgiven that person, so why go dredge it back up, But a lot of times, even if we've forgiven someone that harmed us in the past, there's still a lot of undealt with pain and hurt and rejection that lies dormant. And a lot of times it manifests in physical form in our body and intellectual, emotional, and spiritual, in the way that we interact with other people, the way that we treat ourselves. So it almost requires the SI work, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, that was so good. Basically, sometimes we conflate this idea of no longer being upset with the person who might have been there with our trauma or may have caused it intentionally or unintentionally caused our trauma, because we've made peace with the individual and the relationship doesn't feel like it's still in discord inside of us. That doesn't mean that there isn't plenty of content there that we have to look at directly, is what I hear you saying.
Exactly. Because sometimes it's not necessarily even the person. It's more of the idea of the person or the idea of the relationship that hurt us. Something going on under the surface. And, the saying, hurt people,
Mm-hmm.
but healed people, heal people. People in themselves do not hurt other people. It's their own trauma that is manifesting in their behavior, in their actions, in the way they talk and speak.
Do you have a bit of a sixth sense when people are talking? Have your ears become sensitive for the experiences that they've had that might be leading to specific traumas?
Not necessarily. I like to leave space for them to vocalize when they feel comfortable, specific things that maybe they experienced. I don't feel like my sixth sense is strong enough quite to do that. So, but I also like creating space for people to be able to talk openly and freely. And I'm often told that people are very comfortable talking with me. And I think that's because I don't jump to conclusions. I don't assume things based on even my SI's experience, hearing lots of different stories, assuming this one is going to be just like another's, really leaving that space for the individual to share individually and authentically.
I mean, what I'm hearing from you is one of the advantages to not being wired towards an intuitive preference, because somebody like me is going to make a huge, I hear a couple pieces of information and I'm already making a pattern and I'm already projecting the pattern onto the individual. And for you, because you wouldn't feel as certain doing that pattern recognition, what you've done instead, what I hear you saying is that you've gotten really good at creating a context, like securing the perimeter of a context and making it so that the person themselves feels permission and comfort to express whatever actually did happen or whatever they really truly went through, as opposed to trying to align with a pattern that maybe the person coaching them has stated, like, oh, was it like this and this and this? And the person might be like, yeah, it was like that. But that didn't really give them an opportunity to communicate what truly and authentically happened. And so you work at creating an atmosphere that allows them to do that. And I would suspect that there's all sorts of benefits that come along with the expression the person gives themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the way that you use the word context. I think context for TI is so incredibly important, as well as SI. I think that how something impacts an individual really is ingrained in the SI to be able to accommodate that individual per their experience. And so I think that's where FE kind of comes in the middle of those two things. And it's taking the SI experience with the TI contextual data and creating the platform for the person to share with another individual and allowing that space and that comfort and that rapport to be built on a really good level where people don't feel threatened by judgment or preconceived notions or, what have you.
As you go through these experiences and hear people's story, does this help you with your own growth journey?
Yes, it does. I think that it broadens my understanding of all the dynamic people and the lives that people live. I tend to think that I lived a very sheltered life growing up in an organized religion, and there was a lot of rules and regulations and a lot of expectations of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you guys know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was just I was very closed-minded, I feel like, when I started out my adult life. So hearing so many different stories and different experiences and different journeys from people has really helped me to appreciate the variety of life and stories that people have. And I really love hearing people's stories.
What do you think has been some of the highest leverage growth that you've done as an ISFJ, looking at it through the lens of your functions? Like, what are some of the things that you've done or employed, or maybe just perspective shifts you've had around understanding how you're wired that have really helped you in your growth journey?
I would say, and I feel like this is a very common answer, or at least a very common subject we talk about in the personality growth community, deconstructing our faith and really being able to stand on your own two legs, knowing what you believe and how that affects your lifestyle and where that puts your trajectory. And I feel like as I've grown understanding cognitive functions and my personal journey with type, it's definitely helped me to refine my theological and philosophical understandings of who I am and what all of that means to me.
So for you, it sounds like a big part of your growth in relationships and just in your own development has been sort of tackling that 10-year-old or tertiary function of introverted thinking or accuracy, like really getting more solid in what you personally believe, what your thoughts are, what's true for you, and then being willing to communicate it to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've always been very solid with SIFE related things, kind of sharpening those things and not being like a doormat and being walked over, taken advantage of, which is very typical FE problems, I would say. But for sure, growth in the TINE department, being comfortable exploring topics that maybe before were more taboo, or the idea of deconstructing your faith being okay and actually encouraged, because SI really wants to model whatever was modeled for them. So being able to kind of set those things aside for a while, even though those were what was most comfortable for me. Again, going with what was expected of me, modeling behavior that was set before me was so easy and natural. Having to kind of put that aside for a time to be able to sharpen what I know, what I believe, and like my personal truths, and explore topics that I was interested in without fear of judgment or backlash or going to hell, you know?
Yeah. Religions can definitely wire us in all sorts of ways that we have to overcome. And I'm hearing you talk about your journey, Jordan, to understanding more of your own truth. And what's interesting about that is you didn't just completely go off on your own. You still have a strong faith background. You've just woven more of your own personal self into that faith story now, which I think is really cool. You've converged the two things together.
Yeah, for sure.
So with the idea that you have a strong faith background you came from, let's just say Jordan could travel back to 15-year-old Jordan and have a sit-down conversation with yourself. What does the wise older Jordan that is now have to tell that Jordan, back at 15, specifically about being an ISFJ? Like, what would you sit down and talk to her about? What would you tell her about what she needs to know about her personality as advice?
Don't fear judgment and don't be afraid to ask questions. At 15, you're still trying to figure out who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And it's too early to try to conform to the adults that you see as an authority on any given matter.
How do you deal with judgment? If you would tell younger Jordan, don't fear judgment, I mean, it's so hard not to. Even as I'm 44 and I'm an ENTP. One would argue that my type acts the most like they don't care about judgment. But the truth is that I think everybody does, right? And when you are wired to be really tapped into what's going on with other people, like you are as an ISFJ, how do you get on the other side of fearing judgment or fearing that you're not meeting other people's expectations when expectation setting is important to you? Like, there's so many different things here. What are you doing to get to the other side of that?
Well, I think it's a natural human inclination to judge and compare and compete. And it's also a natural SI thing to compare and contrast. So when you're surrounded with people who all look the same and they're all doing the same thing, and you're the one person that's not, as an SI person, you immediately start thinking, oh no, I have to blend in. I cannot be the person that stands out. I have to be, and as an Enneagram 1, I have to be above reproach, whatever that looks like. So you immediately begin to conform. And judgment for myself is already very inborn. I'm constantly with TI, 10-year-old, I'm critiquing and fine-tuning everything anyways. So I judge myself constantly. Trying to escape judgment from other people, I guess, comes from that constant need to please and do what I feel like people need. And it does come very naturally without even having to ask certain people what they need. That comes from building relationship and connections, but not over relying on those things in order to be loved and accepted and validated. Just being who I am is enough. So those are constant affirmations I have to say to myself.
So you said that if you're leading with introverted sensing or memory and you're the only person who's doing something against the grain, there's a part of you that goes, oh, I must be in the wrong. Have you sought communities or maybe tribes or friendship groups where you realize, well, actually everybody here is the one that's going against the grain?
Oh yeah, personality hacker for one.
Nice.
That's funny.
Yes. I definitely have found bits and pieces of my tribe here. And every single one of you listening knows exactly who I'm talking about. So that, there's so many people in this community that are already at the season and point where I am deconstructing your faith and trying to live your truth. And so you already have a connection, a solidarity, if you will, in that. So that gave me a leg up. I wasn't coming into this as the oddball. Although I did feel very strange at the conference being like one of the only married with 5 kids people. I don't know. I think I was the one with the most kids. So that set me at a disadvantage kind of. But no, I definitely feel like there's always connections to be made. You're always going to relate to somebody on some level. I just try to find that commonality wherever I go. And there you are. You're part of my tribe.
Yeah, fantastic. So that actually, I would argue might be, or I might speculate that might be a way of opening oneself up to more sort of an extroverted intuition, 3-year-old inferior way to integrate that is by opening yourself up to new kinds of people and new relationships.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And so this idea of if I'm the only one that's going against the grain, maybe I need to find more people going against the grain.
Yeah.
Well, and then I think what you said when you were talking about advice was don't fear judgment and don't be so intent on conformity. Oh, no, that second piece was you may not want to lean so heavily on the beliefs and perspectives and perceptions of reality of the people in your life because you might need to do a little bit of work of figuring things out on your own and not what I hear you saying is outsourcing so much to other people.
Yeah, don't buy it off the shelf, basically.
Right, exactly. And there's probably a bit of relationship there between not fearing other people's judgment and then also being willing to strike out on your own and come up with your own thoughts and opinions. You talk about this being a process that took you a while, but how old were you when you really started to deconstruct your own belief systems and deconstruct the things that you probably wouldn't have even second guessed at all when you were younger?
Oh gosh, right into my 20s, I would say there was a big breakdown in our fellowship group that we were part of. And so a lot of people were kind of disconnecting and immediately that started making me think, okay, something's happening here. Why is it happening? And what do I need to be aware of, so as to guard my heart, guard my mind, all of these things, because the emotional energy of it was very consuming. So trying to manage that as much as possible. So immediately right into my 20s and my husband and I got married at 20. Well, I was 19, almost 20. So we were both kind of doing the same thing at the same time.
So what I hear from that is you had plugged yourself into a harmony system, an extroverted feeling system. You're in a small group or a fellowship of people you just probably plugged yourself into. You outsourced it. You turn it on and it's running in the background. All of a sudden that connection starts to fail and it starts to fall apart or it starts to break apart. And that makes you go, wait a minute, I guess I got to do this emotional connection thing on my own. Wait, what do I actually really believe here? And now you start to ask yourself some hard truths. Is that kind of how it processed through?
Yeah, absolutely. And as any judger, stability is like our number one goal. So, or external stability in order to have internal peace.
Yeah.
So when that external stability started to break down, it caused me to question everything.
Yeah. Wow. And again, I want to just make a note to you listening right now. You might have a very strong faith background you come from as well, just like Jordan, just like me and Antonia came from. I don't think any of us are suggesting you have to just abandon that. In fact, Jordan, from your story, I'm hearing you did not give up your faith. Like, you still have a strong faith. It's just that you reevaluated the outsourcing elements of that faith. You started to deconstruct, okay, what did I just buy wholesale from other people versus what do I actually believe? And my guess is that your faith is even stronger now than it once was because it's yours. Your truth is your truth, not somebody else's truth you've borrowed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think SI tends to be very bent on the perceived authority of a matter, and we tend to lean towards, follow after, and even replicate that person or that group's said authority, and try to imitate it rather than creating our own authority, because that taking personal responsibility over your life is also a huge factor. And trying to find the disconnect between some of those in organized religion is very, very difficult. So being able to step away from the perceived authority and be able to give myself permission to be my own authority on the matter of faith, theology, religion, philosophy, and whatever it was I was interested in exploring and integrating into my personal belief system. Being able to give myself permission to do that was huge for me.
Wow. So basically a leverage point too that I hear you saying is introverted sensing or memory. It's looking for a sense of stability. It's looking for, look, well, if I'm not the expert, somebody's the expert. And then because it's looking for a through line and something it can really lean on, it can be kind of susceptible to outer world authority without even thinking about it. But I hear you saying that you actually brought that in-house. Now you see yourself as your own authority, or I'm assuming at least as it relates to how you're going to be thinking about life.
Yes. And I do still have to be very careful. Like I still love to listen to other people who are more learned, if you will, in certain matters. But then I have to remind myself that this is another human being with their own trauma and their own experiences, and they're not living my life. They're not teaching my kids. They're not put in the position that I'm put in with couples and families, that I'm trying to help. And I feel like, again, that's where TI is just constantly being sharpened to be able to curate my own data based on my own experience and not, like you guys said, outsourcing that to someone else.
I just really want to thank you, Jordan, for bringing such a seasoned perspective. I think that it's really easy, particularly in type communities, to undervalue the wisdom that, say, introverted sensing or the memory function can bring. And I think that you have done such a fantastic job communicating its special insights and the way that it really serves other people to be able to deal with maybe their past trauma, or some of the ways that like the leverage points of bringing that authority in-house. Because like you said, nobody else is living your life but you. I'm so grateful that you shared all of this cold wisdom with us that you have based on your personality type.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. This has been fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on, Jordan. And what do you think? You've been listening along. You're the fourth person in this conversation. You don't have a microphone, but we do want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com and directly below this episode, leave a comment, ask a question, maybe share your story. Are you an ISFJ that's figured out some growth strategies based on your personality type? Are you in the middle of a growth journey? We want you to share that. Or maybe you've got an ISFJ in your life. You've seen maybe the struggles they've gone through, or maybe they've been challenging to you, a different type than you, and you've had some conflict. We'd love to hear what your experience has been. Again, come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
Do people have conflict with ISFJs?
I don't know. I'm guessing, yeah. No, absolutely they do.
Somebody's got to have some. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to paint ISFJs with such a broad brush. I know that everybody...
Nothing but conflict, right? That's just causing drama all over the time.
Famous for it. Well, actually, Jordan has been such a delight, and I think that she has well illustrated the beauty of ISFJs. So thanks again to Jordan. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. You heard Jordan talk about her personality type and her cognitive functions within them. If you are curious and want to go further down the rabbit's hole of understanding your functions and your personality type, grab a copy of the book, Personality Hacker.
What I love about highlighting about this book, by the way, I just want to stop real quick, is this goes step by step teaching cognitive functions. So if, let's say you're an ISFJ listening right now, ISFJ is a 4-letter code that points to the way your mind learns information and makes decisions. And the book, it has a chapter about ISFJs that breaks down your whole personality type, but it also has an intro part which walks you through the system of how the system works, how to find those cognitive functions, step by step with some check-in journal prompts to ensure you're learning as you go. It's a fantastic workbook, and it's a great place to start in personality type to learn the system at a fundamental level.
Yep, absolutely. And you can get that at all major book retailers, or you can special order it. However you choose to get your hands on a copy, if you enjoy it, you can leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads. That also helps us out a lot. We also have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of personality type. Do you want to take your personal growth to the next level? Check out our suite of programs at personalityhacker.com under that catalog and see if there's a program that's right for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.